Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 3 of our Bastion playthrough. Previously we completed the quests that involve sparring, learning more about ourselves through fighting, learning to fight as the Kyrians do. This now leads us on to our next quest, which is based around the Inner Reflections. It's one of the first times that as a Kyrian you learn to control your inner thoughts and your former memories. If you remember, at the start of the zone we protected Pelagos as he failed in his attempt. It's interesting to note that whilst we aren't necessarily dead, that hasn't been confirmed as far as we know, we are alive. We are actually undergoing these trials. It's odd that these trials would work on someone who is alive. It seems to me as though we'd be treated much more like an outsider. I'm sure we'll get a little bit more information on that, especially with the Moor scenario that we know is the starting to Bastion. In this next area here, we go on to do what the Kyrians do. We cleanse ourselves, we get new vestments, and we ring some form of prayer bell. It's nice for us to do this. It adds a little bit of flavour to the zone. It gives us a lead up to exactly what we're about to do, and gives a little bit more flavour to the Kyrians themselves as well. Unfortunately, it does give you a dress as a vestment, which I'm sure looks good on some characters, but for a warrior when you're carrying two honor-bound decapitators, it doesn't seem to look quite right. It does seem slightly odd. Now we go on to the part of the quest that is a very, very tiny thing, but it is something that is happening all the time. This quest giver decides to walk to the area. It's understandable in this area as a peaceful area, as something where you're going to be doing some retrospective, some looking upon your past deeds. It makes sense that you're not going to be running everywhere. That's fine, I understand it. However, they have that very annoying habit of being too slow for you to run, but however, if you try and walk with them, they're too quick for you. It's that really horrible middle ground where they're too slow for you to run, but too quick for you to walk. If we could get some form of middle ground on this, where either they do a slight jog or maybe they walk slightly quicker, it would be quite nice. And this is something that's been in Warcraft for ages. Now we have an in-look introspective on our characters, which creates these memories. These memories are essentially a reflection of your current character and how they look. However, it would be interesting if these were related to either A, former bosses that we fought, or would relate more to former enemies from expansions, similar to the quest that we saw in part 2, where it showed the Burning Legion, it showed us protecting the Pandaria from the Mogu. I would quite like to see that change. Also, this area doesn't seem to have any form of sort of mirror of any sharding, so if you go in there with somebody else, you will also be able to fight their reflections as well, which seems slightly odd. Having this place sharded off so only one person can go in at a time would be nice. I could imagine it creating absolute havoc at opening day for the expansion though. This one now, you create a large memory. This is the one that you have to defeat, supposedly, for you to pass these trials. Again, it would be nice if this was an enemy from a previous expansion, say Black Hand or even Kil'jaeden, something that relates to our previous adventures and would make sense for us to be a little bit hung up on, to be thinking about that as a previous encounter. I'd quite like to see that, maybe even include a slight change of the abilities, so you know you kind of experience that fight once again. I'd quite like to see that. It's not a massive game changer. This quest is fine as it is. Having those little bit of extra introspective moments for your character though make it feel a little bit more personal. Now coming up to probably one of the best aspects of this zone. Immediately upon completing this quest, you are given the chance to earn your first Covenant ability for this area, which for the warriors is the Spirit of Bastian. Having this placed here actually makes the zone feel a lot more welcoming. Rather than consistently questing through a zone to be rewarded with something at the end of it and then immediately going, okay, well, do I just use this for world quests? What's the point of this? This now gives you something to work for. It's a case of, okay, I have this ability now. Now I have a little bit more to do with these characters. I'm not just here questing through and at the end they say, yes, well done. Here it's a case of, you've completed these quests in record time. You've completed these tasks that we have put in front of you. You're now going to get a reward, and it makes you feel a lot more tied to the area. Again, the Archon is mentioned, and it's interesting to note that it is never truly mentioned where the Archon comes from. And this is quite nice because it means that it could lead to somewhere in the future. Not saying it will, but it gives you the chance. Here I was slightly confused. I didn't actually see the extra action button at the bottom there. It seems as though that is an unnecessary step. I understand that you are making the choice as your character to accept this gift, so I fully understand why the button is there. It's almost one of those confusing extra steps that isn't necessary, but is a little bit of a nice flavour to the actual quest line. And you now gain your first Covenant ability. Obviously these are all different for every single class. Like I said, the warriors get the Spirit of Bastian, which is a very, very nice ability, if I'm being perfectly honest. It means that you can throw down an area of effect which will keep creatures inside that area for a certain period of time. You'll see me using it here shortly. Another thing to note that is happening a lot with these quests in Bastion is you are getting a little bit of dialogue between Clea and Palagos, which, although it isn't inherently important, the fact that you are getting these little bits of information means that, again, you're feeling slightly more tied to the story. It's not just you going through this story solo. You can see these characters reacting to it, and they're giving you little tidbits as to what may potentially come next. Again, the fact that the Archon is mentioned means that there's a little bit of mystery upon there. Here we enter, obviously, back to Aspirant's Rest. And returning back here to go out for another quest might seem like what some people would consider sort of just busy work that you don't really have to have. Having us come back here again gives us a place to be tied to in the zone. We're not consistently moving forward and forgetting about the previous zone. We're returning to it with characters that we have been involved with previously. Again, tying us to the world. It's quite nice. There is a moment there where Clea asks us if we intend to stay. That does seem slightly out of place because at no point throughout this questing experience so far has there ever been any doubt expressed that we wouldn't be staying. Whether or not that is a leftover from a previous iteration of Bastion or whether there is some potential changes coming forward, I'm not sure, but it seems slightly out of place. There are a lot of signposts, as you can see there as well, which means that it's quite difficult to get lost, which is quite nice. We now head over to the Temple of Purity, and it's interesting to note this area does start to lean slightly more into the military portion of the Kyrian. You'll be seeing a lot more of these Valkyr style characters that are armoured and all have weapons. It's part of the, the lead in from the previous zone where there was a lot of sparring, and it's mentioned that this is obviously quite a big part of the Kyrian Covenant. Once we head into here, you'll see that the actual lighting changes slightly. We still have the same sort of architecture. The lighting changes slightly and gives us a slightly different feel to the area. It actually looks a little bit more peaceful, looks a little bit more as though it is a place for contemplation. And as we find out shortly, that's exactly what it is. A small note on the quest markers here. You'll see that I came back because I noticed the quest marker on the map is one of the newer quest markers, which of course means this quest is part of the campaign. It's nice to have this as it shows that you're not going to be missing anything. You're going to be seeing these quest markers and going, okay, that is one that I have to go and get because it's part of the campaign. They do have regular quest markers that you can ignore. I've gone through this area without these quest marks, without doing those quests, and I haven't missed anything. This quest that we have picked up enables us to speak to some vulnerable aspirants, and we start talking to them about their feelings, and this can go one of three ways. This is the first way, where you'll find a load of their thoughts, a load of their congealed bitterness, pain will pop out and you have to defeat them. And this helps them on their way. This quest is all about helping people. You will get a different dialogue from the actual aspirant and you'll have 3 answers. If you choose the right answer, you will have nothing to fight. You will simply carry on your way and it will give you the tick off for the quest. This area is where we start to learn a little bit more about individual thoughts behind the Kyrian. This one we're helping a Kyrian with their doubts, and these doubts manifest themselves in a very, very interesting way. As you can see on the screen now, you can see that there appears to be an Alliance soldier, and there also appears to be a lady dressed in quite fine garments, and the person that you are attacking appears to be dressed in Defias Brotherhood garb. Whether or not this is actually leaning towards this person being involved with the Defias uprising in Stormwind isn't confirmed. They don't mention it. At no point is it mentioned that that is what this is. However, that slight bit of flavour to those mobs potentially indicates that that is exactly what happens. It doesn't show whether that person is the lady in the fine dress that was killed, or it doesn't show if it was the actual Defias Brotherhood member. Again, these could be placeholder models, we're not entirely sure. Now, the final thing that you can have happen to you when you're talking to the aspirants is they will reject what you are saying. They will almost reject the teachings of the Kyrian. When this happens, they become a much darker blue, they gain much darker armour to them. This is hinting at a potential separate faction of the Kyrian that reject this call to shedding all of your previous thoughts and all your previous memories. Speaking of which, this next part of the quest leads us to talk to another member and help them with the memories. As I mentioned, all these memories aren't necessarily violent, they could be something entirely different. And this person here appears to have been a Tauran in their previous life. This whole sort of area devotes itself to people learning about their previous burdens and what that potentially means for them moving forward into this Kyrian world, into this Kyrian covenant. As you can see here, they seem to be facing off against gnomes and dwarfs, potentially hinting at this person being part of the attack on Camp Taraho. You also see that it's not all about violence, it's about burdens of family memories, which seems to be one of the strongest. One of the aspects I quite like is that there isn't just a single focus on, oh, your previous experiences and your previous thoughts and burdens all revolve around combat. This one seems to mention family, seems to mention bonds that you form in a community. And it's another level that, again, ties us in to the Kyrian Covenant. And this is important going into the later levels of the expansion. We know at max level you make a choice as to whether or not you want to take the Kyrian Covenant, the Maldraxxus Covenant with you. Normally in other expansions, when you reach max level, that is when you start to learn about your other reputations, such as Knights of the Ebon Blade in Wrath of the Lich King. It's nice for this to happen at an earlier level because it means you don't have a lot of grinding to do with world quests from this covenant that has suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Now, this final part of the quest seems to be a final cleansing, if you will, a final trial for these Kyrian, and it seems to revolve around the Burning Legion. This could mean that this Kyrian previously was on Azeroth, or this could also mean that this person was from one of the other lands that we know the Burning Legion attacked. This could be our first hint as to people from another world. We know that the Draenei came from Argus. We know that that is a thing. So people out there aren't a new thing in World of Warcraft. This, however, could hint at an entirely new race that we have never seen before. And once again, this person appears to be a fallen acolyte. Again, the darker blue skin, the darker armor, almost purple in color. And it seems to be something that is happening more and more often in the Kyrian world, in Bastion. It's mentioned here that loyalty awaits you, and that loyalty is actually explained in the quest text further on up when you hand this quest in, and I will point it out. It does happen quite often with quests where suddenly a bad guy will appear out of nowhere. This questline in this zone, however, seems to give you this information quite slowly. It ramps it up, and it doesn't just have you suddenly appearing with a bad guy. There's definite issues that are noted throughout your interactions with the characters. Now, here you will actually notice, once we hand in the A Temple in Need quest, you will see that they mention that these fallen end up going to some place called the Temple of Loyalty. We're currently in the Temple of Purity, so it seems as though that you have multiple temples that mean different things in the Kyrian hierarchy, if you will. So any of them that fall end up going to the Temple of Loyalty. What that entails, we don't currently know. Speaking of people that may have potentially fallen, we're now currently on a trek to visit a missing disciple. He appears to have almost tried to run away from the Temple of Purity, and this is where the story takes a very, very severe turn. You are introduced to what is effectively your current enemy, and it is none other than Uther himself. It appears as though he is trying to make a bargain, make a deal with this fallen Kyrian. My name has been Kexman, and I will see you all for part 3 of our Bastion playthrough.